Today, we're talking strategy. We're drawing up a battle plan for a war that's happening inside our own bodies, a fight against the biggest threats to our long-term health. We're going to dive into how some really interesting research peptides are being looked at to take on the 4 major chronic diseases that challenge pretty much all of us as we get older. So let's get right into it. So here's our game plan for this explainer. First up, you got to know your enemy, right? So we'll meet the 4 horsemen of chronic disease. Then we'll open up the playbook on peptides. We'll look at how they might just help us fight back against metabolic and heart disease, and then shift to guarding our brain and body. And this next part is crucial. We'll cover the rules of engagement. Before we wrap up, we'll look ahead to what the future might look like, a new era of proactive medicine. All right, let's get to it. Time to meet our adversaries. And look, these aren't some figures from a myth. They're very real, and they are, without a doubt, the biggest threats to our ability to live a long and, more importantly, a healthy life. But before we name them, let's pause for a second and ask a really critical question. Are you just aiming for a long lifespan, the total number of years you're on the planet? Or are you aiming for a long health span, the number of years you live in good health, feeling good, and free from major disease? The longevity expert Dr. Peter Attia really frames the whole conversation this way, and honestly, it's the entire reason this battle even matters. So who exactly are these 4 horsemen? Well, first up, you've got cardiovascular disease. This is the biggest killer on the planet. Next, there's cancer, which is basically a disease of uncontrolled cell growth. The third is neurodegenerative disease. Think Alzheimer's, the one that really robs us of who we are. And finally, you have metabolic disease, with things like type 2 diabetes that just mess up our body's entire energy system. When you put them all together, they are responsible for the vast majority of chronic illness and death around the world. So the big question is, how do we fight back? Well, let's open the playbook on what might be a new class of weapons in this fight: peptides. So what in the world is a peptide? It's actually pretty simple. It's just a short chain of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. So if you think of a protein as a really long Lego chain, a peptide is just a few of those bricks snapped together. But here's where their power comes from. They act as signaling molecules. One of our sources had this perfect analogy. Think of them like Post-it notes from HQ that go around telling your cells exactly what to do. Things like prioritize repair, or burn more fat, or calm down inflammation. And this isn't some brand new crazy idea. The story of peptides in medicine goes back 100 years. It all started in 1921 when insulin was isolated. That one peptide transformed diabetes from a certain death sentence into something people could actually manage. Fast forward to the 1960s, and we were making them completely synthetically. And now, today, there are over 80 FDA-approved peptide drugs out there, including the huge blockbusters you hear about, like semaglutide, that are completely changing the game for weight management. Okay, so we know what our weapons are. Let's head to the first front in this battle. We're going to target the 2 horsemen that attack the very core engine of our body, our metabolism and our cardiovascular system. Now, what's so fascinating here is how incredibly specific these tools can be. You've got weight and metabolic problems? Well, research is looking at peptides like retatrutide. It's what they call a triple agonist, which just means it hits 3 different hormone receptors at the same time. It's like giving your body a powerful, multi-layered signal to get your appetite under control and fix your metabolism. Then, for actual physical damage, like to arteries and tissues, you've got peptides like BPC-157 and TB-500, which are being studied for their incredible healing properties. And for artery stiffening, which is a huge part of aging, there are even Russian bio-regulators like Vesigen and Ventfort being researched to help blood vessels stay flexible. And if you want to understand just how powerful these signals can be, check this out: 24%. That's the maximum body weight reduction they saw in trials with retatrutide. I mean, think about that. That's a level of effectiveness that's starting to rival bariatric surgery. It's just staggering, and it shows how profoundly these little signaling molecules can shift our entire metabolic health. All right, let's shift gears and move to the next front. The strategy here changes a little bit. It's less about offense and more about defense. It's about guarding our most critical assets, our brain and our body's cellular integrity, against those other 2 horsemen, neurodegeneration and cancer. So when it comes to brain health, researchers are looking at what they call stacks, which are basically just combinations of peptides. Take this pair, for instance. You've got dihexa, which has this awesome nickname, the brain builder. It's being studied for its potential to actually encourage our brains to grow new neural connections. And then it's often paired with something like Cmax, the focus rocket, which boosts something called BDNF. You can think of BDNF as basically fertilizer for your neurons, just keeping them healthy and firing on all cylinders. Now let's talk about cancer. This is where the research gets, wow, just incredibly exciting. A recent preclinical study looked at pancreatic cancer linked to obesity. And what they found was that retatrutide, the same peptide we talked about for weight loss, it caused a 14-fold reduction in tumor volume in mouse models. For comparison, semaglutide only managed a 4-fold reduction. And this chart from that same study shows something maybe even more remarkable: prevention. Look at the control group. 100% of those mice developed tumors. With semaglutide, that number dropped a bit to 88%. But with retatrutide, only 70% of the mice had tumors actually engraft or take hold in the first place. This suggests it might be creating an environment inside the body that's just hostile to cancer cells. And finally, let's zoom all the way into aging at the cellular level. There's this research peptide called epitolin, and the focus here is on its potential to turn on an enzyme called telomerase. Now, telomerase protects the little caps on the ends of our DNA, called telomeres. Every time a cell divides, those caps get a little shorter. So the theory is, if you can preserve them, you might just help our cells stay biologically younger for a whole lot longer. Okay, these tools are obviously incredibly powerful, and because of that, we absolutely have to talk about the rules of engagement. This isn't about just jumping in blindly. It's about having a smart, safe, and really responsible approach. So let's be perfectly 100% crystal clear here. Most of the peptides we've discussed today are classified as research chemicals. They are not FDA-approved drugs for these uses. So any exploration in this space must, and I mean must, be done under the supervision of a qualified doctor. That part is completely non-negotiable. Now, this quote right here is a total game changer for understanding how these things work. If you happen to have a negative reaction to a peptide, it might not actually be the peptide's fault. It's often a huge clue that the peptide has just exposed a hidden weakness in what's called your terrain, which is basically your body's underlying state of health. And here's a perfect real-world example of that terrain idea. In one case study, someone had a bad reaction to the peptide GHKCU. But instead of just blaming the peptide, they dug deeper into their terrain and found they had critically low iron levels. So the protocol became really simple. Step 1, stabilize. Stop the peptide and fix the root problem. Step 2, retest. Make sure your health markers have actually improved before you even think about trying again. And only then do you get to step 3, reintroduce the peptide, and usually at a much, much lower dose. You see how that works? It turns a side effect into a super valuable diagnostic tool. So where is all of this going? What's the big picture here? Well, it's all pointing towards a massive shift in how we think about health. A future that Dr. Peter Attia calls Medicine 3.0. Medicine 3.0 isn't just a small change. It's a completely different way of doing things. Instead of just waiting around for the 4 horsemen to show up and then trying to react to the damage, this approach is all about being proactive, about aggressive prevention. It's about using all the data and advanced tools we have to get ahead of disease, with the very clear goal of making our health span last as long as our lifespan. The goal really is to die young, but as late in life as possible. And that really brings us to our final question for today. Peptides and all these other new technologies are giving us a whole new set of levers we can pull in our own biology. It's a brand new frontier of personalization and prevention. So the real question isn't so much about what's possible anymore. It's about what we're willing to do with that possibility. If the tools to actually build and defend your own health span were put right in your hands, how would you use them?